Today, we are honored to be speaking with Maggie Hamilton, a writer, researcher, and storyteller whose curiosity about why we do what we do, how our lives intersect, and what we reclaim from the past has taken her into remarkable terrain, from social research to spirituality, from children's books to fairy lore, and from sacred places to the invisible landscapes of inner life. Maggie brings a depth and breadth of wisdom that invites us all to live deeper. Her latest book, What Happens to Our Kids When We Fail to Grow Up, is a deeply honest look about the inner teenager that many adults never outgrow and how this unacknowledged immaturity impacts the next generation. Maggie, thank you so much for being here.
It's a thrill. Thank you.
You write that the inner teenager in adults is often running the household. What does that mean, and what does it take for someone to actually recognize when that younger part of themselves is steering their behavior?
That's a great question. And we see this in a number of little cues. The thing about being a teenager is that we're very focused on our rightness, which means everybody else has to be wrong. When we get choices, we're always looking for easy. What's the easiest option? And it tends to be the option that suits us, not how that option might impact on others. It's also things like when there are arguments, there's an unwillingness to put yourself in another person's shoes because you're operating from a defensive situation and you're always looking for other people to pick up the pieces. And the sad thing, I think, of our culture right across the Western world, and it's leaking elsewhere into the world, is that when we stay in that place of adolescence, we forget the downsides of being an adolescent inside, not feeling any certainty within, a deep certainty of moving forward, that ability to reach out to others and to connect in ways that are deep and meaningful and nourishing, that ability to stand strong in a storm. All those things which we associate with adulthood, which are now it's so devalued in so many ways, are actually strengths which enable us to navigate life at its most difficult and most beautiful. And if we can't stand strong in the storms of life, the inevitable dark nights of the soul are going to be even more painful. So the ways forward is in not necessarily choosing the easy option, but the best option. And that might be something that requires a bit of sacrifice from us to benefit the whole. It's about daring to step out and do things that might be inconvenient for us, that grow us up. And then we see the benefit of that for those around us, and the joy flows back. So there are lots of little ways that we can grow ourselves up, and there is a deep satisfaction when we do grow up, because that strength makes us not only a safe place for ourselves, but for those around us. And that's a very powerful thing to be in life.
I just needed to let some of that settle. There's a lot of wisdom in that,
Mm.
right? I work with teenagers and I absolutely love teenagers. So when you pointed out some of the qualities of teenagers that actually don't really serve our well-being or you know, our wholeness as adults,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, I think that the ones that you pointed out, like, going for what's easy instead of what's best, or focusing on our own story at the center of everything and our own rightness and the inability to maybe take perspective outside of ourselves. I definitely see your point, and I just need to stand up for teenagers
Of
also
course.
and say that I also find teenagers in so many ways to be willing to self-sacrifice for their friends, for their family members, for their community. I see teens give up their time, give up their money, give up their energies and their talents to be of service, to make a difference in the world. So I see teens also as quite idealistic and hopeful,
Yeah.
whereas maybe adults can be more jaded or cynical or pessimistic. I'm wondering, what are the positive qualities of teenagehood that actually could help us be better parents or adults that maybe sometimes as adults we actually lose sight of?
Well, of course, there are many wonderful things about being a teenager. And I think as we progress through the various stages of life, then the trick is to take the best parts of each of those decades, those stages with us, and to be prepared to let go those that don't serve us. So, I mean, the wonderful things, many wonderful things about teenagers, their idealism, their energy, their spontaneity, their willingness to try new things. Those are all really wonderful. I guess what I'm looking at is when we take those negative traits into adulthood and we make them as ideals, that it's okay to be all about me and so forth. And, when you get people in their 50s who are still trying to pretend they're 25 and, we've got the Botox and all the other stuff happening, then that diminishes the experience of what it's like to be in your 50s, what the gifts are, what the learnings are, the difficult bits, which are often the deep soul learnings. Sadly, we often learn best when we go through those dark nights. So it's certainly not that I see teenagers as, dreadful. In fact, I've devoted a number of years to really giving voice to the things that they struggle with, that because we're in a new landscape, so many adults don't understand. So I don't want to pathologize, but at the same time, I think we have to put a steely eye on where we're at, because when we look around the world, there's a heap of stuff that just is not working. And I spend a lot of time in Asia traveling off the beaten track, and I'm always blown away by how much more cohesive those communities are, and so forth. And I want that for all, not just our teenagers, but for our whole communities, to make them more whole.
I think that when we're talking about communities and connection and growing ourselves up, I think that unfortunately for most of us in the West, our role models are skewed by media and social media.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily people's fault. It's not people's fault that
No.
they're holding on to some of these negative teenager traits, because that's all we're fed, that's all we're conditioned. And I think conversations like this are really important, so people have a greater, wider perspective. You say you
Yes.
travel to the East. Me too. I do a lot of traveling to the East, and a lot
Mm,
of the culture that is still there in the East is much richer than our culture,
much richer.
much richer.
Mm,
And so I think
mm,
these kinds of conversations, they can be a little bit confronting, but I think if we can get past the discomfort of it and look at ourselves and ask ourselves, well, what if I took
yeah.
precedence from a different culture? What if I started to embrace my aging process? What would happen? How
Yeah.
would I be? How can I find my footing there? I think that we find, and I know from the work I do with people that are moving through into their 50s, especially women, they gain a lot more self-confidence, a lot more sense of power when they can understand and actually embrace the aging process.
Yes.
So in that, you explore the rise in adult escapism as well. And I really
Yes.
to get your wisdom around this. So you talk about the need for distraction, rescue, avoidance. So from your perspective, what do you think sits at the heart of this soul immaturity, this, or cultural immaturity, if you want a better word?
I think it's exactly as you say, that people have been fed this as the solutions. And I think also we have become lost in the mundane. I love it in Buddhism where they talk, we look at different parts of the world where people might not have enough to eat and certainly don't necessarily have the resources that we are blessed to have. And we look at those people and feel very sorry for them, but we don't see our own soul hunger in the West, that we are so hungry, like the hungry ghosts that Buddhism talks about, that when people pass over, their spirits are lost in craving that can never be fulfilled because they're no longer in the material world. And I think it's because so little is sacred to us now. And that's one of the many reasons I love to spend time in the East, is the sacred is very much part of the everyday. And I think what the sacred does at its deepest is it enables us to look at the ordinary things in life. And it might even be what we see as a little weed, coming up between the cracks in the pavement. And we can see the miracle of the life that is. And it's seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, whether it's in people or nature or whatever. And this explosion of joy and connection. And then I think comes the responsibility to protect that. And I just wish everybody could taste the sacredness that we get in the East. You're walking along a street and you get a whiff of incense, and you go to step into a shop to buy something to eat or whatever, and there's a little offering to the divine, however that is characterized. That is the first thing that people do before they open their shops, as we know. And all these things remind us of the other. And I think when we get trapped in the mundane, it becomes an ever diminishing spiral. And I think this is why we have such huge amounts of mental health issues across the planet. And, this desire just to buy more and more and more to fill this void. And as we know, that's the path that's never going to work. And I feel we're the ones to be pitied, really, on the planet.
Maggie, I'm curious what you do to connect with a sense of the sacred and the miracles that abound everywhere on a daily basis. Like, do you have daily practices that bring you into that heightened awareness of the sacredness and the extraordinary?
Yes, I do. So I have I meditate every day, and that includes also checking with my chakras and doing a variety of things like that. But I have a profound connection with nature, and I live in the middle of a city. I live in the inner city, and one of my great thrills is to teach and share the ensouling of our cities, so that even if we've only got a tiny pocket park, even if we've only got a beautiful tree down the road, by connecting in with that living being, that sentient being, you develop a relationship and you can develop a dialogue. And there's a lot of wisdom to be had in the rocks, in the ground, in the plants, in the trees. So they feed me. And these and other spiritual practices, I'm very interested in ancestral healing and honoring not just the ancestors of my lineage, but of the First Nations people where I live, but also honoring the fact that the spirit of the land on which I reside, which nourishes me, is living and sentient. So what can I do to help nourish that space? And I find those things just, they make my heart explode with joy. That's not to say that I don't have my dark nights of the soul. I do. And, life has thrown some big things at me as it throws at everybody. And it's all part of the mix. But I think it's about joy in little things for me. That's where I see the sacred. And I think once you develop a relationship with the sacred, it has a sense of humor and it does like to delight and surprise us. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
I'd agree. I think and science is catching up with what the ancients have already known. There's a lot of recent research around actually what being around trees and being in nature does to our biochemistry. It's fascinating.
Mm.
And it's bringing, which is what I love, scientific proof
Yeah.
to all of the spiritual wisdom, the ancient wisdom that the great masters have known, the great cultures still are inherent with. I think one of the most confronting ideas that you talk about in your book is how children end up carrying the emotional burden of adults who haven't done this inner work, who haven't grown these negative aspects of their inner teenager. What kinds of burdens are you seeing, your research, because you are a great researcher, seeing kids holding today?
Well, I'll give you an example of boys, because this is one that really, it really shocked me, because it was something that it wasn't in my line of sight. And that is, I was actually, one of the books I've written is called What Men Don't Talk About, and it looks at the lives of men and boys behind the stereotypes, which proved deeply healing for me. To walk into that world and understand it in new ways. So here I am interviewing this ex-special forces soldier, and a lovely guy, and we're good friends. And he was talking about when he was a little boy and his dad left, and the whole wounding process that happened around that with his mum. And I'm sure his mother would be devastated to know this, but he was about 6 or 7 and he had 2 little sisters. And she said, "Now you're mummy's little man." And he said from that moment, he said he felt he had to be the father, except he's a little boy of 6 and he can't do that. I mean, even talking about it now makes me want to cry. And I do wonder if that influenced his decision to be a special forces soldier. Anyway, he did his best over a number of years. And then when he was 12, his mother found a new life partner. And he said, "My heart was broken all over again." And there's a mother trying to make things right, but not understanding things from a child's point of view. And you can imagine the emotional burden that kid is facing. This is what so many of our kids are facing across the planet with broken relationships. And look, we respect the fact that not everybody can stay together, but so many of the parents we have now treat their kids like therapists. So they're downloading their stuff onto their kids, their emotional baggage, asking, kids to spy on what's happening with dad, what's happening with mum. if you're an adult, fully fledged adult, you wouldn't do that. You would find places and people who you could download with, but you would create that safe and nurturing environment for your children. We also see it in dress, the way that, often older mums are trying to mimic their 20, 25-year-old daughter, which in a way takes away the space for her to be 25. And it doesn't give her her trajectory for when she's 50, 55, 60. It doesn't mean to say that we have to go around dressed, like Widow Twanky or something, but it does mean, it's a very English expression, that one. It does mean that we're far better to embrace who we are and where we're at rather than trying to fit the mold of the wrinkle-free, perfect woman in a way that is very superficial.
Yeah.
There's just
I
one,
think these,
sorry.
It's
no, go
also
ahead, finish your thought.
it's
There was
also
just,
oppressive. It's oppressive on us as women, I feel, that to have
yes.
that role model pushed and conditioned on us, it's very oppressive. And women, we've been dealing with oppression for since we can remember. And I just think this is a modern way of oppressing women.
It is, and it's a whole, like the Kardashians or whoever. It means that our kids and as adults, we're actually living outside ourselves. We're living outside this wonderful living, breathing temple and vehicle that we have for these few short years. And everything is about how we are perceived. So we're not actually living in our skin. We're not actually owning our talents and our possibilities.
I wanted to go back to when you said that you were really fascinated with ancestral healing and the
Yeah,
story that you just told about this young man and the burden that his mother put on him emotionally in the absence of his father. One of the most profound teachings I ever heard that it comes back to me again and again, I'm not sure I really understand it yet, um, was from Thich Nhat Hanh. And
mhm.
he said that when we really do true healing of ourselves and we come into our own wholeness, that not only does it heal our generations going forward, but it heals our ancestors going backwards. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, that as we become more conscious and really adult, even if it takes us a long time to get there, but we really arrive at adulthood in our own lives in a way that heals us. Do you understand that that can go backwards through the lineage that we inherited?
Absolutely, because we're living in the quantum field. And in the quantum field, time has a very different meaning and it's a different experience. So I definitely believe the healing that we gain and the growth we gain can go back through the quantum field and forward. And I always ask for it to go in all directions because I think there's probably directions we haven't thought about yet. So all covers it. And I think what we can also do is we can consciously ask that in moments, if we're going for a healing. When I remember, I do ask that this healing will flow back through the generations and forward. I also, because I love the ballet and I love the arts, and I think a lot of I think of a lot of my ancestors who never had access to those things, through poverty and history and all that. And so when I'm sitting at the ballet, I invite them to come and sit with me and enjoy the beauty of it. And but this can sometimes feel like a burden for people. It's like, oh my God, the family tree, there's so many issues in it. What am I supposed to do about this? And what Spirit has revealed to me is that, pardon me, we gift our lineage our own healing. We're not here to heal every single issue that has come up through time, but we gift our healing and our growth. And that is enough. for us as we're still on the journey of growth ourselves. And I love that because it kind of takes away that burden of trying to make every single pain and disappointment and failure right.
It also it takes the pressure off. So
Yeah.
I think that looking at it that way and understanding that way, it takes the pressure off, because I know some people that I work with, they do feel that pressure genuinely. They're working on a
Yes.
path of self-realization, they're doing lots of healing, and they feel a certain pressure or obligation necessarily to do all the healing for their family as well. And I'm saying that because I used to be one of them. I used to want to
Yes.
rescue everyone. And so I think that's really something that we all need to hear, is that we're not here to heal everyone and everything.
No.
But in our own healing, that also helps in our generation, and every generation then can build on that. And past generations, it can be healed as well. With just to kind of round off this topic, with the traits of those aspects. So it's not the whole of us. Let's get clear about it. We're not saying adults are all teenagers. We're saying
No.
there are aspects of self as we grow up, particularly I believe around the conditioning that we receive in the West that don't grow up, these parts of self. What,
Yes.
if every adult did one small daily practice to mature themselves inwardly, what would you recommend they could do?
I think it would be to connect with people who are different from them, and just in daily life. And, there's always that part of us that wants comfortable. So, we're very happy to mix with people who are the same as us because it's not particularly challenging. But I think to connect with people, we come across who are very different from us. And that, of course, is the joy of traveling off the beaten track, because you're forced to do that. And what it does is it grows our humanity. So it's less about judging people as different after a while, to that natural wanting to connect with others because our humanity is reaching out to them. And I think that's something that we struggle with because we all live in our little silos. And to realize people have different viewpoints, including political viewpoints, some of which we might find a struggle. But there may be pathways still to connect to that person lovingly and kindly and learn a bit of why they think the way they do or whatever. And I think that's a great growth little practice to do, and brings lots of joy, I think, and surprises into the day.
I have to admit that that wasn't the answer that I would have even guessed that you would go, that's what a beautiful thing. Like, how do we become adults? How do we, move beyond that immaturity? We connect with people who are different than ourselves so that we have a sense of humility and perspective about there's not just one right way.
No.
I'm not the center of the universe. I'm just one of billions. And there's a real humility in that. How would you suggest parents can go about teaching that to children and to
Oh,
young people?
I love that. And I think that's creating a household where you do have things like volunteer activities or whatever. And also within starting small, if you're having a barbecue, to invite a few neighbors, even of different ages. I think that's a great thing for kids to experience, and allow them to do a couple of things, to have a couple of jobs that make that happen. So it might be putting fairy lights up in a tree or whatever. And for the older people who are coming, to actually task them with taking care of that person in a couple of very practical ways, making sure that person has enough food, they might have mobility issues, and something to drink. Not that they have to be around that person all the time, but just to do something practical with that person. And then after the barbecue, to have a bit of a debrief and say, well, how do you think Mrs. Thing is going? And, oh, well, she seemed a bit sad, because the cat's not too good at the moment or whatever. And so that's really sad. Could we do something to, perhaps we could offer to take the cat to the vet. So you're actually teaching them, A, to connect with different age groups, and B, to how you practically nourish in a social environment, and also don't feel so embarrassed that you stand on the edges all the time because you've got a job to do. And then to see that that's an ongoing possibility, you're actually teaching them the skill of connection and of nourishing those around them and feeling useful. And teens, like everybody else, love to feel useful.
Yeah. You are so speaking to my heart at this moment
Oh,
because one of the things I do is I facilitate intergenerational programming so
oh,
that teens and elders in the community come together and
yeah,
share stories and wisdom with each other and friendship. So it's so
lovely.
uncommon for teenagers who are busy with teenagers and going to high school and on their social media to connect with older people regularly.
Yes,
If they're
yeah,
lucky and fortunate, they have grandparents in their lives, but many teens don't, or their
no,
grandparents live far away, or they've passed.
yep,
To create opportunities for young people to connect with older people is just, I've seen, it's just a huge blessing and a gift, and it
yeah.
impacts in all directions, like you said, in all directions.
It does. And I
Yeah.
heard of a wonderful scheme going with one particular school where they could teach different languages at school, learn different languages, and they found elderly people in the community who were from those places like Italy and France and China and Vietnam. And so they created a program where those kids could spend time with that elderly person, speaking that language with them. And what a blessing for everybody.
Yeah.
Delicious.
Yeah, I was watching, there's a docuseries about it where they literally bring older people together with younger people, and it showed the massive uplift in, the loneliness of the older people, and their
Mm.
infirmities improving. So their mobility improved, their speech, their diction improved, their outlook on life improved. And then the younger people who were interacting with the older people who felt quite scared and quite inhibited
Yes.
around them in the beginning, the older people with their wisdom that they brought really helped those younger people come out of their own self-identify and adult themselves through the process. So it was this beautiful exchange. I think there's a lot of opportunity for schools to get involved in programs and set up programs like that.
Absolutely. And as you say, everybody benefits. It's a 360-degree, and that's the delicious thing, I think, when we can use our imagination in this way. It's not just about institutionalizing people and that's it. It's about being creative about how we keep those connections going, even if people do need residential care. And there's a lot of laughter in those situations as well, and tears. And I think the lovely thing is elderly people have time to listen. And, when we're young, everything is such a drama. And I mean, I notice this myself now with younger friends, who are having huge dramas at work or whatever, and it's just so big. And I remember that back to the time when it was so big for me, but having traveled a bit further down the track, you have a different perspective and you see your younger self then, and hopefully you can bring a bit of balance into that and calm. And we all need to be heard.
Yeah, I think a big part of our culture is missing, where we lack the initiations that we would have when we were
Mm,
tribal living. There's no initiations to take us through the doorway, the doorstep
mm,
into the different phases of our life as we age. And so
yeah,
I think that's another contributing factor as to why a lot of people in the West are trying to stay young, because they're our only role models, and unfortunately, Hollywood is our initiator. And I
yes.
and so, what would you have to say about that, around knowing about ancient initiations and stages and phases of life? What's your take on that?
I'm a great believer in ritual if it's grounded in something sacred, and it can be very, very simple. And I feel that, life has become a blur for a lot of people. I think back to my dad, who's passed now, but he was an incredible raconteur, and his whole generation were, because they noticed and remembered, because they didn't have this swill of information and stuff washing over them every day. And I feel it's important to create sacred moments for the young people in our lives. And I do it in simple ways, with some of the young people in my life, where, you know, I'll do something with them at Christmas. We might go and have a high tea or whatever, if it's a teenage girl. But then we'll go and walk in botanical gardens, and we'll talk about the trees and the flowers, and they'll take photos, and just making it that sacred space between the two of us. It's a dance of memory to connect them into their city in a way that is loving and nourishing. And I'm always surprised that, several years later, they'll remember some incident of that. And I think that's what it's about, is memory, because these become cherished moments. And it's like gathering nuts for winter for a squirrel. Then the dark nights of the soul come, but we've got a few nuts in our bag that can see us through that wintry time. And I think sacred ritual and sacred memories, and sacred really is about life enhancing. It is about the growth of lightness, life, and love. And I think sometimes people feel that sacred's really complex. I think keep it simple, and make it something that just nourishes through its simplicity. And that benefits in all directions.
So I actually teach a class. I teach sixth graders as well, and I teach a class this year all about ritual, sacred ritual.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
know, I know. I wrote this whole curriculum, and one of the teachings that I came across that I thought was so beautiful is that ritual is the punctuation of daily life.
Oh, I
Like a
love
punk,
that.
isn't that amazing? That punctuation gives us a pause, gives us a break.
Yeah.
It makes us pay attention. It's not just we're going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing in our busy, harried, dramatic lives. We're stopping. We're a semicolon
Wow.
or a comma or an exclamation point to like add some spirit and excitement. And ritual can do that. So ritual, like
Yeah.
how I love what you're saying, that it connects us to the sacred, and that sacred is life enhancing. So there's the ritual,
Mm,
there's the like the what are we doing that we're ritualizing, but there's the why, which is
yeah.
like because it adds joy and meaning, and it connects us to spirit. And then there's the who, like who are we doing ritual with? Right? There are
Yeah.
rituals we can do with our own soul. There are rituals we could do with a tree in our favorite park. There are rituals we could do with strangers or community to create connection. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you're engaged, like who are the people that you're engaging with in a life enhancing sacred way?
Well, I find myself connecting with lots of different people with the various projects I have. And what I do once we've met, and if we're meeting again, I always say, well, when can we get together for a sacred cuppa? or a sacred pastor so now they all say that as well. And that's exactly what you're saying. You're denoting that this time it might just be half an hour to have a cappuccino together. This is sacred space. This is time out for us. And yes, so it works a treat. And to me, this is all about ensouling our lives. But I'm particularly passionate about city life because so much of the planet now lives in towns and cities, and we have often very negative things to say about city life, but cities can be just as soulful as anywhere else. It's how we navigate them and
I
what we
fully
bring to
agree.
them.
I fully agree
Yeah,
with that. And especially for women, because women, if you talk to any Indigenous person, they will say women are the glue to community and
yes,
society. And women are being increasingly isolated, disconnected, relying on machines, relying on AI, which
mm,
disconnects us even more. And especially women coming up to their 50s, it seems that, a lot of women that I work with who are coming up to their 50s are terrified that they're coming
yes,
up to their 50s and they're like, I don't want to go over that threshold. It's scary and I'm not
no,
going to look young. And what will become of me, especially if you're single, which a lot of women are. And
yes,
one beautiful sacred ritual that a friend of mine did with me for my 50th was to have a ceremony. So, not a birthday party, not getting drinks,
no.
but at my home, I invited all my favorite people and we sat in
Oh,
circle and we exchanged thoughts about each other. And then we literally just walked around in the circle on the outside of the circle. And my friend, who was already over 50, took me over into, that next phase of my life.
oh, beautiful.
And what it does, these kinds of rituals that we can do in cities, we can do in our
Mm,
it allows us to honor that next phase of life, which
yes,
we don't have any role models for, but just
no,
having these conversations, these are ideas that we can spread and share so that people can have those sacred cuppas. They can have those sacred
mm,
rituals as they move into their wise elderhood phase and
yes.
honor themselves in that. And I think that in itself will
Mm.
bring a lot of maturity. What do you think, Maggie?
I think that's right. And, I hear people saying, getting older, it's awful and, you're not noticed anymore. That hasn't been my experience. And I think it's very much tied to how you see yourself. So if it's about having to gain attention, then you're probably on a road to disappointment. But if it's about connecting, then there are so many people out there who want to connect. Um, you have a useful role to play, I think, to hold space. And as we were talking earlier, to hear deeply and see deeply. And that's also what ritual's about. It's apart from discerning how each other's traveling, it's also about seeing and hearing deeply where you are at that moment in time and to set aside the opportunity to step across that threshold in a meaningful spiritual way is very empowering. And it lights the path forward. And I think I love what Ram Dass says, where he says that ultimately we're all walking each other home. And I think if that was our motto, regardless of our age, and we understand that differently at each stage of life and with different relationships, there's nothing better, there's nothing more profound than to help walk each other home.
Yeah, it's a beautiful quote. I love Ram Dass. He's one of my favorites.
Yes, yes.
Um, as we wrap up, and thank you for sharing your wisdom today. As we wrap up, what message would you give to your younger self? I'm interested.
I think I would say worry less, love more, and trust the universe more and trust your intuition more. And everything will unfold as it's meant to. I don't now believe that there is only one path for us. I believe that the universe that has flung whole cosmoses into being is so creative. There are many ways we can fulfill our potential. And I think we often get lost in trying to find that one path and hanging on to it for dear life, rather than treating life as a dance, dancing with the atoms, the atoms dance, to dance with possibilities. That's not to say not to have responsibility, but not to be so rigid that we don't see all the signposts.
That's a beautiful teaching and wisdom to share, to leave us with. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
How you mentioned that you have a lot of projects going on. I'm curious if you want to just close by telling us some of the projects you're most excited about, or how people could find out more about what you're up to and where they can find your book or other teachings that you've created.
Yes, well, I teach ancestral. I have ancestral healing groups. I'm still involved in book publishing, and I work on other people's work, which is very exciting. And I also continue to write books myself. I'm now having a go at fiction. The Last Woman Who Was Hung in England, retelling her story. So that's and then time in nature and sacred travels. Um, and I love it, and I feel very blessed to be able to do what I love. And I'm always very humbled with the Great Spirit that I'm able to do what I love,
And
because that's a great gift.
where can people find you, Maggie, online?
Yes, probably the best place is my website, which is maggiehamilton.org. And you'll see from there, I have a blog on the fairies, which is really about how to connect in with the spirit of nature. But probably my website's the best place.
Thank you,
Can't
Maggie.
wait.
Yeah, this has been a really rich and wide spanning conversation, from ways we reclaim our inner teenager to sacred places outside and within us, to the deeper invitations to really live with more integrity and curiosity. You've given us a way of seeing, not just doing something about it. So if this conversation has stirred something in you, please follow all of Maggie's threads, her books. She's done lots of research, written lots of amazing books. I've read them all, and each one of them have opened my eyes to different aspects of life. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time and your presence and your generosity today, Maggie.
A great pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you both.
Thank you
Go
so
well.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks.